been to marriage counseling a number of times before in my first marriage, and I walked into the second session of the last time that we would go, and I looked the therapist in the eye and I told him, I said, I really appreciate you trying to help, but I'm done. I'm tired of men like you telling men like me how to behave. I'm not playing this game anymore of listening to this and what it is that I need to do to make her happy, which is not possible. And I said a few choice words, and I walked out and slammed the door. And when I went to the car, I sat down. My heart was just racing. I was actually shaking a little bit. And I happened to catch my eyes in the rear view mirror. And I said to myself, now the war begins. I've been studying spiritual growth for nearly 15, 18 years, and yet therapy was not going to give me the answers that I needed.
Most of us are taught to analyze our past, to tweak our flaws and fix our problems kind of from the outside in. But traditional therapy only adjusts the way that we're looking at it, doesn't change the one who is looking at it itself. Today, we're discussing why consciousness is the ultimate alternative to therapy or addition to therapy, and how to stop defining yourself by your experiences. Welcome to Becoming You, where we apply spiritual wisdom and truth to your everyday life. I'm Terry Hasty.
And I'm Haydn Hasty.
We all feel adrift sometimes, perhaps even most of the time, because we lose touch with that profound connection to the inner, the other, the spiritual, so to speak.
The invisible.
Yeah, we learn to just kind of ignore that, and we trade this deep inner knowing for endless analysis. In this episode, we explore why analyzing your story might be keeping you trapped in it, and how becoming conscious of the truth of who you are and why you're here is the key to running and living your life from the inside out.
There's a tendency for all of us as we grow up to move away from that inner knowing that is part of who we are, to become enthralled with daily life, where the invisible, after a certain amount of time, appears not to be real at all. When we have issues or difficulties, we always anchor down into the horizontal, into the physical, where there is an endless source of dialogue and analysis as to why we are the way we are and how the past influences us even now. We think the past is responsible for creating the future. The childhood that you had that determines why your marriage is the way that it is. We think we are the sum of our experiences, which of course we're not. And the common denominator is that everyone defines themselves from the outside in until we learn otherwise. In fact, I personally, to be honest, I've never met anybody who defined themselves from their inside. But it's the inside that's running the outside. It's your existence that's running your experiences. And until you come to understand your existence, you will never, and I mean never, understand your experiences or the purpose of them.
Everyone has had experiences in personal growth in which they're trying to figure something out, something that they really did not know how to deal with. Sometimes it's through therapy, sometimes speaking with a trusted friend, and sometimes, if you're lucky, as I've been and you've been, Hayden, many times in our lives, someone comes into your life, sometimes without even being invited, to help us out, and certainly circumstances align to do that as well. However, change is a sign of maturation, but generally we only change when we have to or when we're forced to. It's like my neighbor growing up who stopped smoking only after her cancer diagnosis. And actually, at that point, it was too late for her. It's a painful way to learn. And it does force the issue, though.
Well, pain works as a teacher, but it's so damn hard.
Mhm.
I don't want to live in the past, but I shared the story about marriage counseling in my first marriage because it'll resonate with a lot of people who have ever tried to drag a relationship back from the brink. It's difficult, if not impossible, to do.
And it's usually our experience to try to find out what the other person didn't do right. So, what you said, Hayden, about relationships, I think is so important. We can listen and discover what the other person needs from us for them to be happy. But it's true. Like you said, you can't make another person happy. I've been the beneficiary of really good therapists, and I've also had the experience of being told what I needed to do to be a better partner, to be a better wife, like you said, to do the change, make the changes, do the things that would make them happy. The really good sessions were the ones that focused on me.
You
And
said to make them happy. How many times have you been married? I mean, how many men
okay,
are
make
we
the
talking
other
about?
person, the one other person other than you. Yeah.
Okay.
So in this podcast, we're not saying that, of course, we never say this, that therapy isn't a valuable resource.
No, of course not.
But what we're talking about is going inside rather than basing your life and growth on the other person or anything outside of yourself. And I think that is a challenge.
Absolutely. The world has changed. And what you and I are trying to do in our work together is to establish a new language. It's a language that goes beyond basic self awareness and trying to help people build a new science of living that is rooted in the truth of who they actually are, that can only be found at the higher level of the mind, or other words, consciousness.
And relationships are a really great way to learn
Uh,
about who we really are.
that's
The
where you
good
get to find out
relationships,
who you
yeah,
are.
yeah.
Now, I want to be careful with that word truth. Truth isn't something that we invent, it's not something that Terry and I have come up. It already exists within physical matter, it exists inside of you. We aren't discovering anything that hasn't already been there. What we are doing is expanding your understanding and our understanding too, so that it can be applied, which is what consciousness is. Consciousness is applied wisdom. But
Hmm.
pure consciousness, truth consciousness, we've heard these times many times before, is unified everywhere. It knows all things as itself, which means it already knows the truth of who you are. The real question is, how do you begin to intentionally choose to align with that reality? How do you start learning about that?
And I love what you just said, that consciousness is applied wisdom. It's action oriented. It's not just some esoteric idea up in the ethers. And so much of life up to this point has been about coming to terms with what reality is and what it isn't. We as human beings do all kinds of crazy things if it promises or even implies meaning or helping us come to terms with who we are. But eventually, we all realize that nothing outside of ourselves fulfills us for long, even if we don't admit it. When the sun is up, when we're kind of falling asleep, we recognize that there's still something missing. I have the utmost respect for therapy and its many attempts to help people uh, reconcile the irreconcilable. But problems just compound when our focus stays locked on the other people, or the outer circumstances. As we were saying, Hayden, relationships are one of our greatest learning tools, but just obsessing over the other person and what their problems are is kind of a classic trap of the ego to not be responsible or take accountability for ourselves. It leads to endless hours of mental gymnastics that just kind of reinforce the ego's favorite line, like it's definitely not my fault. The mind never thinks it's the crazy one, it thinks everyone else is crazy. Just this morning, I was having an argument with myself. My inner
Maybe
voice,
you need to go to therapy.
my inner voice told me I was being unreasonable, but my ego fired right back. I mean, it just took a split second and said, I deserve to feel this way. And that's where I think self awareness really helps. My inner voice warned me, if you open your mouth right now, you're going to regret it. And I knew she was right, so I zipped it and took responsibility for my own emotions, and at least to the point that I didn't project them onto anybody else out loud.
Or you didn't act on the
Right,
projections.
right.
The
Oh, good point.
projections are automatic.
Yes.
They are going to take
I was
place.
projecting healthily,
Well, it is healthy if you don't act on them.
but silently, yeah.
Right. My own personal experiences in therapy and development, marriage counseling, group therapy, so many weekends of self awareness retreats would eventually lead me to believe that the discussion, regardless of what it was, would eventually reach a point where it could only circle back to the same old foundations of that discussion, saying the same old things. In my experience, even with gifted people, therapy was not about empowerment or existence at the level of the soul, or you could say the transcendent within, because that's in the invisible. The visible is a whole lot easier to talk about and dissect, and the soul was never ever part of that conversation. You cannot make something that the mind sees as unjust justified or fair. The mind cannot reconcile an injustice as something that is part of your evolutionary path, and you had chosen those circumstances as part of the path. You know, you went through your divorce, Terry, and in my opinion, much more consciously than I did. I was always trying to reconcile the irreconcilable, and it was not going to happen.
And it caused a lot of angst. I don't think I
Angst,
was
it caused a lot of darkness and
right.
pain. That's just the way
Hmm.
it works.
And I don't think I was more conscious, Hayden. I did get some really good guidance from my attorney who counseled me to be collaborative and generous. And that did make a huge, huge difference. His experience, when I think about it, and his own self awareness helped me in my process.
Well, I think it could be said that self-awareness is a helpful prerequisite to consciousness, sometimes because it does reveal to us what doesn't work.
Before we started this work in consciousness, I found myself in the same situation that you were just describing. Like I'd be working with someone in a coaching session and get them to a point, help them get to a point of what I would consider significant or deep self awareness. And then I'd have this uncomfortable feeling of it being incomplete. And the other person would invariably say, "Oh, wow, it was so helpful. Wow, I get it now." But I would feel like something was missing. I'd be dissatisfied.
Actually, it wasn't a feeling, it's that you knew
Right.
that something was missing.
And when I learned and then included this consciousness, wisdom applied into the work with people, I realized what was missing. See, this isn't therapy. It's essentially a yoga of knowledge. It's a path of life that is not about an escape to another world, nirvana, I'm a heaven, but is an embracing of being in your physical body. But it does contain an ascent to a higher knowledge with the understanding that truth consciousness itself seeks to come into your everyday life, displacing the old ways of living in order to make room for itself, for truth. This work isn't about thinking or analyzing. This work is about being. So, if the purpose is seeking just an afterlife, in spite of the fact that you can't even manage your daily life here without encountering depression, sadness, powerlessness, the inner battle that I was just describing between my higher self and my ego, and the daily assault of this experience of meaninglessness here in the human body, then thinking that you can be better off by being somewhere else is kind of a fantasy. It's like, well, if I move here, I won't, my marriage will improve. If I change this job, I'll be a better employee. If I had a different boss, I'd be happier.
That's why I say, and I don't have any problem saying it, that consciousness is an alternative to therapy. And I would certainly say, without any hesitation, that the future of traditional therapy is going to change significantly and will not be based so much on the mind, but what I refer to as the transcendent within. It is the higher part of you, the psychic being, the soul, the intuitive, that lies inside of each one of us. But it gets covered up and veiled by the past and the growing up experience and the mind, which I simply repetitively refer to as the triangle of mind, body, and emotion.
And while those events, particularly the negative ones, will have an impact on you, sometimes a huge impact, your story that you're telling yourself is not the real story, but it can feel that way. There's another story, a much more promising one, a more powerful one that you haven't been told. It's the story about you becoming whole and well and fulfilled and not wanting to escape, but wanting to be here. But there is an illusion. The illusion is the lens through which you see the world and yourself. Therapy attempts to adjust the lens, to tweak the lens, to talk about where the lens came from, who stole your lens, who damaged your lens, other mindless games.
I love that.
Yeah, the greatest limitation in traditional self awareness is that it reinforces your identification with all of that noise, with your little self, not your big self with a capital S.
What I find so fascinating, because of the experiences, so many of them that I've had with so many people who have encountered this reality of consciousness, is that their experience is pretty all inclusive. That is to say, that it has a direct and immediate impact on the entire triangle, the framework of mind, body, and emotion. Self awareness explains and describes, but it's consciousness that reveals and resolves. Where in the human mind can you find harmony, peace, justice, equality, and a litany of other conditions to which mankind has always aspired to, but never reached in its entire history of existence?
And if you did find it in your mind, the ego, I think, would try to strike it out, because then the ego says, well, then you're going to be a sucker, or you're going to be taken advantage
They
of.
would see it
Yeah.
as a threat. Where in the perfectly visible imperfection and endless suffering of mankind can you find the power of God? You can't until you understand the true source of suffering, which essentially is the absence of consciousness. So I was talking about individuals who've had experience with consciousness, and what I learned was that without even analyzing or dissecting or examining the mental or emotional patterns, it was consciousness and the reference point of consciousness, which is the same thing as the reference point of the transcendent within, that would straighten out those patterns. But that was because the new reference point had been introduced to the mind.
So I'm glad you said that. And if you're okay with it, Hayden, I'm going to give an example, because I want to make sure that people can get
Sure.
this and apply it into their life. So one of the thoughts that was shared with my mind many years ago is, you are never upset for the reason you think you are. You are always upset about something inside of you. And I remember trying to find loopholes in that, like that couldn't possibly be true. And one time I thought I had for sure found, a variant, a loophole. When I was at the mall, I bought something, I put it down in a dressing room, went to get a different size, came back, and my bag was gone of the item I had just purchased. I said, do you have security cameras in here? They're like, well, not in the dressing rooms. Anyway, I went back to the place where I bought the original item and said, if they try to return this, and I was acting like a crazy person. So I went home without that item. It was gone. And I was so angry about it. But I did say I have found a loophole in this knowledge that, you're never upset for the reason you say. I was upset because somebody stole this from me, and that was wrong, unjust, unfair. That was bad. I was so angry, I'd lay awake at night sometimes and think, I hope that catches on fire. Like while she's wearing it would be ideal. How crazy is that? So I remember speaking with a group in a workshop about the incident And suddenly my face turned red, and I kind of thought, oh my gosh, I got it. The reason I was so upset for months about this $30 item that was stolen from me was not the injustice of
Theft.
the theft. It was because who leaves their bag in a dressing room?
Only dumb people.
Stupid, careless people, clueless idiots. And I didn't like being reminded that I was that careless, stupid, idiot person. And that's why I was so upset. You can be upset if somebody takes something from you, but the 3 month anger, rage, burning up mad about something is always going to be something inside of me. And once I got that, and I really realized that there is no loophole to it, then the mind can feel peace and can feel harmony
And
around
simply say,
even
well, I'll make sure I don't make that mistake
right,
again.
exactly.
I think it's scary for all of us in the beginning to begin that movement inside, but that is the only way that our existence is going to be resolved.
So this quote from Sri Aurobindo, I think, really fits in this conversation, Hayden. So I'm going to share it. Spiritual development takes quite a different approach because it regards the individual as inherently whole within a greater system of wholeness. Enlightened sages of all times concur in the view that an exquisite correspondence exists between the harmony of the heavens and the life of man on earth. That which is above is like that which is below. The macrocosm is equal to the microcosm. This observation led them to describe man as microcosmos, a harmony unto himself, a center around which orbit the manifestations or outpicturings of his inner landscape. Unlike psychology, the spiritual perspective holds that the events of a man's life proceed from a convergence of heredity, environment, the whole past action of his nature, which determines will and character, as well as the complex mechanism of destiny, referred to in the Eastern vernacular as karma. Given these set of determinants, the details of one's life experience appear to have been chosen at a much higher level in order to ensure a specific quality of consciousness which would encourage the development of soul. The ancient science of astrology, based upon a knowledge of these set of determinants, concurs in this view and affirms that all that happens to a person occurs within a higher harmony, willing and accomplishing the highest good of all beings, that all things are the workings of the Supreme Being, and nothing which happens in or around us is in vain or without its appointed place and just significance.
And I don't recall any of that coming up in any of the marriage counseling sessions that I attended. I'm not knocking therapy. I'm just saying that the game has changed and the evolutionary process has speeded up, and mankind is transitioning to a higher level of functioning and living. The destruction they're witness to, which I've spoken about before, is one of the greatest indicators that a new tomorrow is coming. Self awareness therapy and the hundreds of forms of therapy that have paved the way to this bridge that leads to a new world is being formed. But they cannot take you over the bridge. That's going to require knowing something different than what you currently know.
It's like that skit we saw, Hayden, where the family's sitting around the table asking for God's guidance. Please tell us how we can be an instrument of your peace. Tell us how we can share your love and grace in the world. And they're so sincere and praying, and all of a sudden the ceiling opens up, and this beautiful light comes down upon them, and this deep voice says, I'm asking you to sell all of your belongings and begin serving the poor today. And they all looked up and said, quick clarification, everything, we have to sell everything. I just love that. We also have to be willing sometimes.
And then somebody yells, "This house is haunted," and everybody screams and runs out. It's funny. It's great.
But we have to be willing to know something different. I'm not saying you have to sell everything you own, but to be willing to know something different and to hear something different.
Robert Wilkinson, and the privilege that we had of both you and I of being with him and working with him for more than a decade. Robert wrote an article called Modern Psychology and the Question of the Soul. And in it, he said, and I quote, he said, psychology in its derivative therapeutic process is founded upon a principle of uniformity. It dissects and dismembers the dimensions of consciousness to analyze their function and reorganize them into a more harmonious mode of expression. It seeks to adjust the human creature to the limitations of his instrument and the society in which he functions. It achieves this goal by a series of elaborate mental theories which provide continuous experiences of emotional release by shifting the responsibility for one's actions outside oneself. It simultaneously moves the individual out of the present moment and away from what is into a preoccupation with what ought to be or what should have been. It has developed over time a rigid dogma which seeks to explain and order all aspects of human behavior from the poise of the reflective intellect. However, this limited mental perspective mistakes appearance for reality and fails to appreciate the profound spiritual symbols which lie behind and give rise to all mundane experience. One last sentence. In other words, it has no connection with the real because it is constantly dismembering and analyzing apparent experience to fit into its subject object paradigm.
I know it can be hard to really hear that and get that, but it's so important that when he says that we're constantly dismembering and analyzing the experience as we think it is, rather than really being able to see the truth of what's happening and the purpose of it. And if we want to make any sense of this, I think we can be consistent and return to this existence experience paradigm and the core question of who you are. Defaulting to identifying yourself with your mind is really standard operating procedure for most of us, but it can produce disastrous results for us. Believing that you are your experiences, good or bad, creates a false reality. In truth, it's just a deeply ingrained habit, kind of coloring new experiences with your old ones. But what if you could begin identifying yourself not with your past or your mental constructs, but with a reality that is stable, even in this unstable world, unchanging within the swirl of your everyday life? It's that center that holds in the storm. Consciousness expresses itself in a million different ways, and you are one of those ways. You are one of those ways that consciousness expresses itself. In order to embark on this journey of becoming, of self-discovery, we choose to enter this physical life. We temporarily forget.
Meaning that the soul chooses to enter the physical life, not the mind, not the ego.
And right, the mind forgets its inherent oneness with the whole, but the soul never, of course, loses contact with that. The invisible becomes visible when we're born. The spirit takes a physical form, and you exist as both the eternal and the physical, living across two worlds at once. The ultimate question is, with which do you choose to identify? What if you began making that shift today to identify more with your soul than with your body?
Well, there's the you that you think you are, which is the you that you made up. in the growing up process. Then there's the you that you truly are, that was contained in you at birth. One is real, one is not. False identity that we all have, that we all practice, is like a cork. It takes a hell of a lot of effort to keep it underwater, but eventually it finds its way to the top. And this really is, it's a pretty good way of describing the becoming process
You mean your
itself.
true self will make its way to the top?
It keeps trying to surface, right, even in the most difficult of
Yeah,
circumstances.
we just had the joy of a week with our 2 year old, 2.5 year old almost granddaughter, and we were both saying what fun it is to get to know her as her personality emerges. And I think the reason 2 year olds are so much fun is their true self is on the surface. They're not trying to hold anything down. They're not trying to keep themselves underwater, or they're not trying to fit in, or they're not trying to be something that somebody else wants them to be.
Well, the instructions of how to get out of the box, or how to get out of you could say, the problem, are contained in the same place as your identity. Both are going to be found above the mind, but not in the mind. So consciousness is really, it's not about psychology or therapy, and yet those schools of thought have had their place in the growth process. Let me give you an effect. It's a good visual that you begin to work with. And it once again, going back to the beginning of the podcast, we are being forced to evolve. We're being forced to change, and there's a new language that is beginning to emerge to help us understand what is taking place. Birth is a process by which the illimitable is closed within limits. Once you're born, the boundless, the eternal self, is now contained in boundaries. The infinite you, the eternal you, is now contained in the finite. It's taking you, a vast and boundless soul, and putting you in a circle. And we call that circle the closed tape loop. In that process, in that circle, your individual cosmos is formed. The little me, the little I, is formed and is individualized. Now, in that cosmos, it becomes really important to get a handle on how everything is orbiting, how everything must become ordered in order to figure out how to survive.
And that's really why we created the Becoming You journey, which is our online curriculum. It's a monthly opportunity to not only get a treasure trove of resources, audio, video, written, and there's also a workbook that goes with it, but really to be part of a community of people who are seeking to figure out this order, to figure out how they really live a life from the inside out of purpose and of meaning, to create that center that holds in the storm. So if that's something of interest to you, we encourage you to go to our website, truthspringasheville.com, and you can find out all about how to get started on that journey with us today, the Becoming You journey.
Well, I want to go back to, you mentioned the word centering, and I had mentioned the word ordering, because those words are, they're very, very important in this process of becoming. But the ordering, really just like a galaxy. Now, I go back to what you said earlier: as above, so below. The macro is the micro, but in contained boundaries and limits. And so here, once you come into the physical, the center is comprised of the horizontal and vertical axes. There's the expanding and contracting forces of your life. And within this cosmos, within this circle, lies all your experiences, good and bad. But from this angle, everything seems separate and disconnected, because those billions of other people, they've got their own individualized cosmos going on too, and they're working on trying to get their cosmos figured out and how to get it to work. But you begin to see that they're part of the one consciousness that created it too. We're all part of the same consciousness, but each one of us has our own individualized cosmos. So some people's cosmos, well, it's just outright annoying. And another person's cosmos, well, you might be really attracted to it. But you come into the process having pre-selected a lot of the stuff that makes up your cosmos. And are you ready for this? And there's a destiny that has already been contained within that cosmos that came with you at birth. There's the will of your ego, but there's the will of your soul, the gravity of the soul that is constantly pulling you towards the higher and truthful part of your existence. And then there's the will of God. So who do you think is going to win this? Eventually, in one lifetime, you will wake up. Now, when you're unaware of these dynamics, your universe, your galaxy, it spirals out of control. And all of us experience this all the time. When your horizontal daily life runs into trouble, the vertical axis creates a contracting experience, forcing you to move from the outer part of your life to the inner part of your life, to your center, to come to terms with the event because you realize the answers aren't out there. You can't figure out how to solve the problem.
You and I were just talking, Hayden, about I've always thought, well, when times get tough, people turn to God or people turn to spirituality. But I think when times get tough, we turn to our own ego. Like, how can I control this? What can I do to minimize the damage? How can I move this forward? What do I need to help me get in a better place? We might move to prayer, but it's kind of desperation, like, get me out of this or help me solve this. I'm not sure that we really move to center or move to this
It's
inner.
really a failed attempt at avoiding the contraction and avoiding the
Right.
pressure that we feel in those difficult moments. It's like A Course in Miracles says, if you do not go within, you will go without. And that actually is true. Until the center is forged, the ordering within your cosmos cannot take place. And that's why it seems so often that you don't have any control over your life and that chaos runs your life. And that's okay. It's all right. We all have to live through that. That's part of the process. That's why we're here. But it's also why consciousness is so important. It's the missing piece of the puzzle of any individual's life.
Consciousness is the force that teaches you how to create and maintain that center, that micro, through the understanding of the truth that lies in the universe, the macro. Consciousness teaches you to rise above your mind and invites you to see the truth of who you are and what you're doing here. You're not doing here to get mad every time somebody steals something from you, or every time you get your feelings hurt, or every time your heart's broken. You begin to define yourself from the inside out, not from all those experiences that happen out there in life. And when you can start to define yourself from the inside out, really like our 2-year-old granddaughter, that makes you powerful and that makes you a force in the world.
You become a master of your universe, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. And that's why consciousness is a wonderful alternative and supplement to therapy. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope we'll see you next week.
Yep, take care. We'd love to hear from you anytime if you have questions or want to engage with us. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.